I have a
We're live.
okay.
Um,
Turkish rug that I got in
I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everybody here tonight.
and so I have it hanging in the house.
Got to have Reverend Moore from Gospel Tabernacle will lead us in the invocation, please, sir.
To the fine constituents of our city and those that are in charge, I want to thank you for this opportunity. Let us pray. Father, I am grateful for once again allowing us, according to your word, to take this position and to say to you, thank you. The scripture says, where two or three are gathered together in your name, there you are in the midst of them. It also says, Lord God, if we acknowledge you in all of our ways, you will direct our paths. Therefore, I am grateful for this wonderful group of individuals, professionals, people from our community who have taken the time to make the decisions that make our city successful. Now, I pray, oh God, that your divine intervention would rest upon each one of them, that your divine protection, God, would guide those that are in our service-oriented industry in Covington, that, oh God, your hand of provision will continue to honor, Lord God, the decisions that are being made here this day and in the furtherance of our year. We bless your name and thank you, God, for what you're going to do, and we honor you for all these things. In Jesus' precious and matchless name we pray. Thank God. Amen and amen.
Say the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Scott, for the roll call, could you show Mr. Hunter absent tonight, please?
Yes, sir.
That brings us to the approval of the agenda.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Two things we need to add to the agenda this evening. First is R 2118, and this is a resolution of the Council of the City of Covington and thanks to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the other is a proclamation for National Crime Victims' Rights Week, April 18th through the 24th, 2021. And I move that we approve the agenda with those two additions.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any citizens' comments tonight? Correction and approval of the minutes.
Move for approval of all three.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We've got two appointments that we need to address tonight, and I don't know that we have anybody yet to serve for the Planning Commission. So we just can table that till next month, and if any of you have any ideas or anybody knows of anyone that lives in the city of Covington that would like to be a part of our Planning Commission, let us know. We also have an appointment on the Social Service Board to fill the expired term of Joyce Persinger. She had to resign because of her husband's health issues. And that term ends the 31st of December of this year. I know that Kathy Carson had shown an interest. Was there anyone else?
That being said, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Kathy Lamb Carson for the position on the Social Services Board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have a presentation tonight from Davenport and Company. Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Good evening. My name is Jimmy Sanderson. I'm with Davenport and Company. We are a financial advisor to the city. It's great to be here. We're going to walk through this presentation, and I've presented it to council before, and I'll just remind you, interrupt me anytime, stop me. We can go backwards, go forwards, or whatever you want to do. This is meant to be to provide some education to you on the financial status of the city and to the citizens. So just want to set out first the goals and objectives that we had. We met with your staff and talked about really looking at and reviewing the general fund, but also the city's utility enterprise fund separately from the general fund. With a couple of goals, want to look at the current credit ratings that you have, and some trend analysis, seeing what the general fund has done. over the years. Some key financial ratios that we've shown the city before, and then compare you to other national and Virginia credits. So you can see how you compare to other Virginia credits that are similarly rated to you, but then also some national medians for cities and towns as well. We're going to look at the city's debt profile, both on the general fund and the utility side, and the fund balance position. That fund balance is something we've talked about a lot. The city's done a great job here in the last few years of improving your fund balance. This is really just your cash position. We're going to talk a little bit about debt affordability. And you've got some projects that we know about, and then there might be some other projects that you're going to take on. And really, what's the affordability of the town? How could you pay for those projects going forward? On the utility fund, similar things we're going to look at, the performance of the utility fund historically, and then again, look at some projections on how you might have to pay for some projects that you might have going forward. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we want council to come away with, when you ultimately look at a CIP or look at projects, that you'll have some understanding of where you stand financially, the stability of the city, and then how those projects might be paid for. So we're going to start with the general fund. And these are the credit rating categories out there. And you'll see here it's Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. Those are the three main rating agencies. The city is currently rated A1, we've highlighted in green, A1 by Moody's, and A+ by Standard & Poor's. We want to give you a little sense on the right of these are the general categories that the rating agencies have to determine what your rating is. And some of these things we have control over, some frankly we don't have control over. They're general economic tax base, for example, the finances, management, debt and pension numbers. You have a little bit more control over that than others. But the same thing down at the bottom, the institutional framework, a lot of that has to do with how the state sets up local governments in Virginia. So those are some things that you do and don't have control over. But a solid rating for the city. That's the high A category, so just below the AA category. To give you a sense of what some other jurisdictions are, cities and towns, and nationally, there are in the AA category, we got AA2, AA3, and then single A. Remembering that's where you all are. And there's a lot of cities and towns in those credit ratings. In Virginia, there's fewer. There's in the AA3 category, there's Abingdon and Danville. In the A1, it's Covington, Franklin, Manassas Park, and Radford. So those are the only ones that are rated in those categories. So you'll see later when we do some comparisons, we'll show you exactly where you stack up versus those jurisdictions. One of the things that we look at is where your real estate tax rate is. Obviously, that's for local governments in Virginia, that's a big part of your budget, right? So Covington is on the low end of the tax rates, and these are just cities in Virginia. Williamsburg, Radford are the only ones that are lower. Williamsburg in particular relies heavily on tourism revenues. So their sales and meals tax revenues, and then they have some extra revenues that they get down there. So theirs is the lowest, but Covington there is at 80 cents. We've also shown the statewide average over there on the right, and down on the bottom is $1.08. So you're 28 cents below the state average. One of the things that, as an outsider looking in, that tells us that you have some capacity, at least when you compare yourselves to other cities, for revenue generation through the real estate tax rate. Your meals tax, again, looking at your major revenue drivers, Covington is on the high end of the meals tax rate. So you're at 8%. On the low end is Radford at 5.5%. So again, you're on the low end on the real estate side, you're on the higher end on the meals tax side. Lodging tax rate, again, here you're on the lower end. You're at 6%. Salem is at the top at 8% with a number of others. But so again, now you're on the lower end. I want to talk a little bit about your fund balance. And again, this is looking at your unassigned fund balance. So that's not restricted, it's not assigned for any purpose, but unassigned and could be used for any purpose that the city wants. And we do it as a measure of your overall revenue. And these are right out of the Moody's rating reports on all of these jurisdictions, as well as the medians. And you're at 29%. The others are 30% for Abington and Danville. They're higher on the higher rated side, so you expect them to be a little bit better than Franklin, Manassas Park, and Radford. But Covington is in a good position in this stead. Again, we're going to look in a little bit to see where you've grown your unassigned fund balance over the years, and something that we've talked with council about before, and that's a positive. It gives you some flexibility, in particular when we have some bumps in the night, whether it's from a capital project that comes up that you've got to take care of, or whether we're in a situation like we've been in the last year or so with COVID. Here's your unassigned fund balance specifically. And so you can see you've gone from just shy of $4 million in 16 to you're north of, or just almost at $5.3 million now in unassigned fund balance. And again, this is as of the end of FY20. We'll see how FY21 ends coming up, but put yourself in a good position if there are any unforeseen revenue shortfalls or expenses. At least you've got some money in reserves to take care of that. But again, this is an area where we're going back to 06 or so, a place where we wanted Covington to grow those fund balances, and you've done that, which is a good thing. Debt. All right, so this is your total debt as a percentage of the full value of the city of Covington. This is a little bit different than you may remember. You've got a constitutional debt limit that's just based off the assessed value of real estate. We're measuring this off the total value so we can have everybody on sort of apples to apples. But you're at 3.2%, and you can see that's lower than Danville, higher than Abington. Abington doesn't have a whole lot of, they're a town, obviously they don't have to provide for schools. Manassas Park is higher, so is Franklin, and Radford's on the lower end. So you're sort of right in the middle, I would say, there, but certainly that's not one that's off the mark. The national medians, I would just say they're typically lower for cities because a lot of states don't have to do, cities don't have to take care of schools. So those are taken care of by the county. So that's a little bit off on this metrics. Debt service to expenditures. So one of the things we want to think about is how much of your budget on an annual basis is fixed that you can't cut. So if things got bad and you needed to go in the middle of the year and cut some expenses, what could you cut and what couldn't you? Well, you can't cut debt service because we've got to make those payments. And so we try to measure how much of your debt service makes up your total budget for the year. And you're at 11.5% of your total expenditures are for debt service. And you'll see here that you're on the maybe a little more on the elevated side here compared to your peers in Virginia, a little bit higher than the medians as well. Remembering again that the national medians don't have to take care of schools, so they don't have the associated debt service with that either. But I will say that 11.5% is considered by the rating agencies to be strong, meaning it's good. Anything greater than 15%, they would consider moderate. So you're in that strong category. Anything at 8% or below, the rating agencies would consider very strong. So you're at the top end as far as debt service to expenditure. So it's not, the rating agencies wouldn't consider it overburdening your budget. So let's look a little bit at the debt profile, and then we're going to talk about some capital funding analysis. This is your total tax-supported debt. Again, we've separated out the utility debt specifically from this. And you've got a number of different ones going back from 13 to 17. Some of these were refundings that paid off older debts and refinanced them at lower interest rates. Generally, your interest rates are very, very good. They're on the lower end. The market has been such that we've been able to refund a lot of debt in the Commonwealth of Virginia for localities to lower that debt burden for you. But the outstanding par amount as of the end of FY20 is almost $23.5 million. The vast majority of this debt is for schools. North of $20 million of that obligation is for schools. The general fund piece is only $3.1 million. One of the things we went back and looked at to give you a sense of how much debt you've paid off over the last 10 years. You've borrowed some and you've paid off some, but your debt burden that you've paid off from 2010 to 2020 is over $8.5 million. So you're $8.5 million less now than you had back in 2010. So you're you're retiring your debt, and you're paying it off as you go through, which is good. The legal debt margin, this is one of the things that we talked with staff about, and we were looking at it in particular because it's in your CAFR, is done a different way than we're showing here. And one of the things that we questioned was how that was really matching up to the Constitution. And we reached out to your bond counsel just to make sure that we were showing this to you correctly. So this is good news. The CAFR says one thing, but the reality is we can include in your tax base the Public Service Corp real estate as well as the typical taxable real estate, which almost doubles the amount of taxable assessed value. But in Virginia, you're constitutionally limited to 10% of debt to your assessed value without a referendum. So you'd have to have a referendum in order to issue more than this. And so it's something that we keep an eye on. We want to make sure that we've got some headway there. If you do need to borrow money, you have the legal ability to borrow on a general obligation pledge. And for those of you that may not know, a general obligation pledge is a pledge of the full faith and credit of a city in Virginia, meaning that you as a council are binding future councils to come up with that revenue to pay that debt service. If it's not being produced by the revenues that you have, you're agreeing to increase your revenues by whatever means you have to pay for it. So it's the strongest credit that we have in Virginia, and that's why they limit it a little bit. But gauging from the current value of the total assessed value and what the outstanding debt was, you've got a margin of over $30 million that you could technically borrow under the Constitution and be within this limit. That doesn't mean that you can pay for it under your current structure. So let's be clear about that. But this is at least the outside, what we call your debt capacity that the city has. And then debt affordability is something different. It's somewhere much lower than that and what you can afford to pay as a jurisdiction and what your citizens can pay. So here's your debt service structure. And a couple things we want to point out, and I want you to keep in mind as we go through it later, because it's going to come back up. Your debt service goes out to 2041. You currently are right at $2 million in your tax-supported debt service, and that drops down in 2023. So in 2 years, your debt service is going to go down from $2 million to $1,845,000. And so that drop, you'll see it here, is something that if we just keep everything the same, in a couple of years, you're going to have the ability to borrow additional money, incur some new debt service without having to adjust your budget from where it is today. Meaning, so you could fill in that drop with some debt and pay for it without having to come up with revenues from anywhere else, because you already have $2 million budgeted in your budget. And then you'll see again out in, I guess that's 2029, we've got another step down where we go down to $1.5 million. And then in 2031, it drops again to $867,000. So each of those drops are opportunities in the future if you have capital projects to fund that you can incur debt without having to generate additional revenue in order to pay for that debt service, because you have a natural decline in your debt service. Now, one of the things that I also want to point out is you've got out in 40 and 41, we've got a spike up in our debt service out there. And that's a result of a couple of loans that you took out that ultimately were financed as level debt service versus level principal through the state fund. So it doesn't surprising. It's not surprising, and it's not a bad thing. You did it in a way that actually saves the city some money. So, but it's certainly something that in the future we're going to want to make sure we keep an eye on, and we plan for that increase. So out in 2039, when somebody builds a budget, they're going to need to know that come 2040, your debt service increases a lot. That's it there. Maybe the only thing I'll point out to council is the payout ratio over there on the far right. The payout ratio is how much of your debt you pay off over a 10-year period. And you're currently just shy of 60%. That's, again, I would say that's a strong payout ratio. So you'll pay off 60% of your debt in the next 10 years. That's a measure that we look at generally to see whether you've got your debt backloaded or whether you're paying it back in a prudent way, and this shows that you are. So one of the things that we wanted to look at was what projects do you have? We know you've got one project that we're going to need to fund long-term, and that was the emergency road improvements that we financed through a line of credit last year. So you've got approximately $3 million of general obligate, what I call general fund projects that we're going to need to layer in and put on your books going forward. So again, we're going to now talk about how that's going to get paid for, and then we're going to talk about how other projects might get paid for by the city if you choose to. So we made some assumptions, very simple here. And again, knowing that your debt service has that drop out in 2 years, what we would look at doing is do 1 year of interest only. That's going to cost us approximately $90,000 in interest in FY22. 17 years level debt service. There's different projects in here. We could go out a little bit longer. We don't want to finance it too long because it would cost you more on the debt service. 17-year level debt service, 3% interest rate. We'd say that's a conservative interest rate, meaning it's probably a little bit higher than the market is right now, but the market moves around. And so your cost again would be $90,000 in FY22 and FY23 and later just north of $200,000. One of the things that we want you to keep in mind too is the value of a penny in Covington. We like to sort of translate the cost of borrowing to a tax equivalent number. It doesn't mean you have to raise the real estate tax rate to get there, but from a revenue generation standpoint, we think it's a good way to just keep in your mind that the value of 1 penny is $60,000. So if you needed to generate $90,000 in new revenue, it would cost you 1.5 pennies on your real estate tax rate. I'm not saying that you're going to do it, just saying that's how you could do it.
And with that 60,000, that's including the public service?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. That's correct. It includes the public service. And one of the things that maybe I didn't make that comment earlier, that's an area where the valuation of that may be fluctuate a little bit more than real estate. So you've got to keep that in mind because you've got, again, as a city, you've got a large amount of public service real estate.
And one other thing, sorry.
No.
That I'd like to emphasize to you all, as I'm sure you all remember, we went through the VDOT lane mile inventory, and we have those additional funds that are now coming in annually of about $86,000. So that pretty much covers the first year, but then we can potentially, if we choose to, continue to program that additional money that we were not previously receiving towards what may be, some $200,000 worth of debt financing as well, if that makes sense. It's not all too bad.
So we're looking at just funding this $3 million of capital. We talked about the decline in your debt service out in 23 of $200,000. And again, it remains flat until you get out to 2029 where it drops again. And so when you look at it, you can take on that $3 million of capital that we need to do with effectively coming up with $90,000 of additional revenue in 2022. Again, our debt service remains flat, so there's no drop in 22. We've got to come up with additional revenue there. Could come from our reserves, could come from other revenues that you have. Theoretically could come from increased revenues from other sources as well. So that would cover you in 22, and then you wouldn't need to come up with any additional revenue in 23 and on because you've got that $200,000 drop in your natural decline in your debt service. So you would just reprogram that to pay for this debt service that we would take on for the road improvement. Again, I just wanted to remind you that the 1.5 pennies would generate that $90,000 in FY22, but it's $90,000 of additional revenue we would need to come up with. So that's good news. That natural decline in your debt service is going to allow you to finance that road improvement without having to generate any material additional monies to pay for it. All right, so the question would be then, all right, well, what about after that, right? So we know that you've got some other things. You've got some economic development, maybe a pad site that's a little bit in the early stages. Can't quite tell exactly what that might look like, but certainly the city is going to have some projects to take on in the future. That's your job to figure out what's best for the city. We want you to kind of take away from this what are the parameters as far as how we're going to pay for those projects, depending on how much you want to take on. So just keep this in mind. For every $10 million or so that you want to borrow, the annual debt service is going to cost about $700,000 a year. Again, we've assumed 20 years level debt service at 3.5% interest rate. Move the interest rate up a little bit for planning purposes, just to be a little bit more conservative. And if the city utilizes the drop in your debt service for the road project, which we certainly would suggest is a prudent thing to do, that you then are going to have an additional decline in debt service of $100,000 in 2029 and an additional $500,000 out in 2031. So we talked about it. It steps down in 22 and then it's flat all the way out to 2029. Then you have that additional drop. So we don't have a drop in our debt service until 2029 to help pay for any new projects. So effectively, if you think about it, if you want to come up with pay for $10 million, and you've got to come up with $700,000 of additional revenue, what's that going to cost you to do that from a real estate perspective? And so that's what we've gone into and we've looked at here. It would cost you approximately 10 to 12 pennies on your real estate tax rate to pay for that $10 million of capital projects if you were to bring them on anytime during that period until your debt service drops. So between now and 2029, you're at least looking at having to generate an additional $700,000 of revenue to pay for $10 million. $5 million, have it. $350,000 of additional annual revenue you need to come up with. And so, but once you get out to 2029 and you've had that drop and decline in your debt service, you're going to be able to do an additional 8 to 12 million of capital projects without having to raise any new revenue. Again, because we're going to be able to use that drop in your debt service out there to fund that. And so over the next 10 years, you could do 18 to 22 million of borrowing with that 10 to 12 pennies. And we haven't assumed that the growth of that penny is very much over those 10 years either. So there'll be a little bit of probably growth in that as well. And one of the things that we would look at in particular, if you were looking at 10 to 12 pennies on your real estate tax rate, how does that change your real estate tax versus other jurisdictions? And again, you'd still be one of the lowest ones in the Commonwealth of Virginia and still well below the average of $1.08 where it is today. So I think as you start to think about your capital projects, one of the things we just wanted to make sure you had in your head as you thought about it was, again, for every 10 million, at least between now and 2029, there's going to need to be some additional revenue generation that you would need to do to pay for it. The other thing we looked at was there may be some opportunities over the next 12 months or so to refund some of your debt service purely for savings. We monitor this for you, and if there are opportunities, we'll take advantage of them to lower your debt service. We also believe there may be some opportunities, depending upon what you as a council decide from a project perspective, there may be some ability to restructure some of your debt, lower those debt service between now and 2029 in order to give you some capacity to pay for some more projects. That would be, though, paying your debt off a little bit, so paying your existing debt off a little bit slower. And so, I mean, one of the things we would absolutely want to explore that further with staff and with you, but there may be some opportunities to do that. And if you were to do it, again, I think what it would be is you could reduce the penny impact from 10 to 12 to approximately 5 cents or so to get 10 million of capital projects. Or you could borrow a little bit more, funding 15 million of capital projects at that same 10 to 12 cents. So again, this is one where I think this is a little bit more getting into the weeds, but want you to just understand there may be some opportunities as interest rates still remain very low for us to lower your existing debt service, and then maybe strategically do some restructuring a little bit as well. We wouldn't want to extend the final maturities if we could. So if we'd said we were borrowing over a 20-year period, we'd want to keep that within that 20-year window, so we're not kicking the can down the road for future generations. So that would be certainly one of our goals and one of our recommendations to you. So let's switch now over to the utility funding. Maybe, Mr. Mayor, I'll stop just to make sure before we switch to the utility funds, if anybody wants to delve in deeper there, happy to answer any questions about that.
Any questions?
Okay. So your utility fund, we're looking specifically at the water and sewer fund. That's the area where we see lots of jurisdictions. I'm sure that Covington's going to be one of them. It's going to have a lot of capital needs going forward. And we went back and looked 5 years of your historical revenues, again, combining the water and sewer revenues and expenses to see where you stand out. Your sewer system, frankly, from a financial perspective, is not as strong as your water system. One of the things that we're gonna look at is seeing how we can make them maybe a little bit stronger combined than standing alone by themselves. But let's look at just the bottom line here. We went through and looked at your revenues, your expenses, your capital outlays, et cetera, and then in particular what your cash and investment balances have been over the last 5 years in the utility fund. And these are, I'll tell you, are very strong. If you look down here at your debt service coverage numbers, the very bottom in the blue, they range from 1.69 to 1.63 in the later years. And that's saying for every dollar of debt service that you have at the end of the day, once you've paid your expenses, for every dollar of debt service, you have $1.63 of cash to pay it. Anything above 115 is good. Above 150 is, I would consider, very strong. So from that perspective, you're cash flowing annually your system. It's self-supporting, which is a good thing. It's not relying on transfers from the general fund to pay for operating costs of the utility system. The other measure that we look at here is your total operating days cash on hand. So if you look at your unrestricted cash and investments in 2020, $4.5 million or so, that would last you 578 days if you never got another day of revenue into the utility system. Anything from 1 to 2 years of reserves like that, we would consider very strong. In the utility world, these are dollars that can be spent pretty quickly, though, if you have something go wrong. And $4.5 million, although as a percentage of your revenues is a very strong, those monies could get eaten up pretty quickly. So the smaller the system is, the more we would like to see those reserves be, meaning the higher days cash on hand number. One of the things we looked at was what your rates were, and these are, again, we're just looking at the residential. We know you do differently with residential versus industrial, but your residential water rates have remained relatively flat over the last 10 years or so. The water rate's gone from 22 to 25. The sewer rate has gone from 30 to 31. These are monthly fixed rates, regardless of the usage. And so, if we looked at it to see what those increases were per year on the sewer side, on the water side first. The water side, that equates to approximately a 1% increase on an annual basis if you were to do it. On the sewer side, it's less than 0.5% increase. Combined, less than 1% for the water and sewer bill increases on an annual basis. And that's something that is good and bad, right? You're keeping your rates low for your citizens, but when you do have a capital project coming up, oftentimes it requires our localities to raise their rates quickly, and citizens have some pushback on that as well. And so it's one thing that we're going to talk about here in a little bit on maybe a way to mitigate that a little going forward. We also looked to see where you stood versus some other similar jurisdictions. This isn't perfect. We tried to look at jurisdictions that had similar number of users, as well as not really large, obviously large systems, and we based it off of 4,000 gallons average use per month. Again, the city uses a flat charge for residential usages. But the monthly water bill, you were $25 a month. City of Lexington was a little bit lower, but you were again on the lower end. The average for this peer group was 36.68. The monthly sewer bill, again, Covington was on the lower end of the monthly cost at $31. The average of this group was $47, and the combined over on the far right, $56 for Covington. The average of this group was 84.4. Again, I'm sure that you could pick some other jurisdictions maybe that are a little bit lower, but we tried to find ones that were comparable to Covington as well. So the takeaway here is simply that, again, we haven't raised our rates consistently over the last decade or so, and they are low compared to a lot of other jurisdictions. The utility debt, again, we separated this out, just water and sewer debt, $12.9 million. Doesn't surprise me that you'd have a material amount of debt on the utility side. These are expensive things to upkeep. You have brought on a number of them in the last 10 years as well. And so these are what's paid for by the utility system. The good news is that 3 of them at least are at 0%. We were able to utilize some state programs and grants and low interest rates in order to pay for some of our utility expenses in Virginia. So your staff's done a good job of getting low interest rates when we can. Your debt service on the utility side, you remember where we talked about with the general fund, there was a drop in your debt service, and we were able to use that to pay for future projects. On the water and sewer side, we don't have that as much. Again, your debt service doesn't drop at all until you get out to 2033. So any ability to pay for projects bringing on debt service is either going to have to be paid from your current revenues or from some additional revenues that you would bring into the system. But right now you're just north of $900,000 of debt service here. Again, and then it drops off to $680 and on down. But all of your debt's paid off by 2039 for the utility system, which is good. It's only 20 years. Just some observations that we had, and I hit on a couple of these already, but sort of the best practices for a utility fund is that it's self-supporting, no inflows from the general fund to pay for it. Not all jurisdictions are like that. So from that perspective, you'll see you're in a good position. We want to maintain a certain amount of days cash on hand, 1 to 2 years. Debt service coverage above that 1.15 times coverage number, and maintain competitive rates. And one of the things that we do have concern about sometimes is that rate shock when you do have to bring on a big project and you've got to raise rates quickly on your citizens. The current status of your funds, again, solid cash and investments over a year and a half. You've operated with a balanced budget. Debt service coverage has been over 150. That's good. Observation about the uneven rate increases. Your residential rates are lower. One of the things that if you think about it, we look back to see what your water and sewer expenditures have done. They've gone up 25% since 2016, but your revenues have only increased 10% over that time. So eventually there's going to be that disconnect between those two, and your revenues aren't going to keep up with your growing expenses. So we wanted to look at a couple of things for you on the capital funding side. Again, when you start to look at your CIP and your needs going forward, you're probably going to be like a lot of our jurisdictions. There is an aging infrastructure related to that. And one of the things that I did want to bring up, I meant to bring it up earlier, but I apologize. One of the things that you're going to have as a tool may be the rescue plan by the federal government. I think it's a little premature right now to peg those dollars in any slots. I expect we're going to get some guidance, hopefully, from both the state as well as the Treasury Department on how you can spend those monies. We're counseling our clients strongly not to include those monies in your budget for this year, in particular for recurring costs. But those may be a place where we can mitigate some of these impacts, both on the general fund side as well as the utility side. But it's just a little too early to tell. You have at least one project that we're working on right now, the EQ Basin project, approximately $3.9 million. Again, there's some grant funding in there. Trying to get low interest loan through the state, which again, very good funding. But again, it's $3.9 million that we're going to have to layer into our debt service, knowing that our debt service does not drop for a number of years. And so one of the things we wanted to at least put in front of you to think about as you're looking at your budgets going forward, what if you were to implement a 3% annual rate increase on the utility side? 1% of that we think should be there just to maintain your margins on the operating side. So that's something that, again, we see a lot of clients, even if they're not trying to increase their rates for capital projects that they see coming down the road, they are trying to maintain some margins on the operation side as well. Again, the strong cash reserves in case for emergency expenditures, but then also one of the things I think you can look at is using some cash for pay-go related to your utility needs. So as you build up reserves, you can use them to offset some of the capital costs and not have to borrow as much. And then again, 2% would go toward funding capital needs in the future. So we looked at what that might fund for you, and looked at it a couple different ways. The first point is annual. If you were to implement an annual 3% rate increase, again, 1% would go to operations, only 2% would go to capital. That would fund approximately $10 million of capital over the next 10 years. Just on an annual basis, what it would generate in additional revenue. The decline that you've got in your debt service out in 2033 to 2036, that would fund another $10 million of capital. But again, not until we get to that point in time. So again, at least another 10 years or so before you could borrow that money and pay for it with that decline in debt service. And once we got out there, you would continue to have that 2% adjustment for capital. That would fund another $10 million of capital. So that's a total of $30 million or so over the next 10 to 15 years that we believe that you could fund both from these modest increases as well as the decline in debt service that you have. There are some opportunities to access low-cost funding to the extent that you could do that, borrow a little bit longer than we're assuming here. You may be even able to be in the range of $40 million over this period of time to fund your capital projects.
Jimmy, I know when we had previously had some planning discussions, we had talked about potentially like what that 2% might actually equate to in a monthly bill, and kind of being able to equate it to almost like a cup of coffee. Oh, boom.
Great question. So one of the things that we do like to do is translate this to obviously council, but citizens as well, as what that's going to mean to them personally. So what we've shown over here on the right is the 3% increase to those monthly charges going out to 2030, and you'll see if you look in 2022, that 3% increase will raise the monthly charge by $1.68. Annually that would be $20.16. And then we roll it all the way out to 2030. Again, if you were to do it for that entire time. Again, I want to sort of stress a little bit that this is just modeling that we're doing for you. These are rates that you would obviously consider on an annual basis as part of your budget. If you commit to 3% in 1 year, that doesn't lock you into 3% going forward, but you can obviously reevaluate it each year as well. But at the end of the day, what we thought about was, what does your monthly bill look like after 2030, again, compared to where other jurisdictions were, and you're still at $73 a month for water and sewer. Again, it's a fixed charge, and that still would put you below the most of the others that we compared you to before. So the last slide, just a little bit of housekeeping, but one of the things that we are going to be looking at in the spring relates specifically to the EQ Basin project, working with BB and the manager and VRA about getting that transaction funded with low-cost funding to the city. One of the other things we're going to need to look at as well is the takeout of the emergency road project line of credit as well. That's something that we need to get done by the summer. And there are a couple of options that we're going to come back and talk to council about how best to do that as well. But we thought in particular that this presentation and understanding a little bit of this background would be helpful, hopefully, to you as you now start going into your budget in a little bit more detail, and in particular start thinking about the capital projects that the city has, both on the general fund side, but also on the utility side. So, Mr. Mayor, that's my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, any questions?
And I have a executive summary for you all, like snippets of it that I'll give to you before we leave.
One of the things, Jimmy, that doesn't show there is the solid waste that's built into our utility bill. When you're looking at those rates in other cities or towns, their utility rate is water and sewer without solid waste. Our costs include solid waste.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there is a separate, there's a separate, here it is. There's also a charge for solid waste. So
Yes.
you're right, but we broke that out. So
Right.
these numbers are just water and sewer.
Yes.
And then
And people don't understand that a lot of times, because when you look at the utility bill, they're looking at a water bill. Well, our water bill is the same as somebody else. Well, our water bill's not. Our water bill's $25.
One of the lowest in the Commonwealth,
Right.
yes.
And I think that's a key factor when we're talking about expenses. I forget what see, 25 and 31. So our solid waste is $29 on top of this,
Yes, sir.
and people don't recognize that a lot of times. And I think that's key for our, looking at our bills and our utility bills, that is included in there.
Gotcha.
Without that, it wouldn't be but $51 water bill or utility bill without the solid waste,
And one thing I will say that,
$56.
you know, the head of finance and administration and myself have appreciated Davenport's work on this, is really helping us to look at ways, in very small incremental ways, to make sure that we're still covering operations or just generally the cost of inflation. As I'm sure anyone knows, through COVID, and you try to do at-home projects or anything, you know, cost of materials, cost of things like that have continued to increase. So just the sheer cost of doing business in the production side of it, for water and wastewater has increased, as has the cost of the chemical purchasing and those kinds of things. So I think it's important at times that we look at things in context of incremental, rather than sticker shock. And it's never easy to think of potentially, you know, what would it look like raising something, but when you have to respond to the market and market price materials and other things as well. So I thought it was good that, you know, to get you all some options, and also understanding when things are rolling off, especially as we've started some of the 10-year CIP planning as far as laying some of that out, and then, you know, getting this concept and then figuring out from that list then, as a team, what do we want to prioritize as far as some big ticket items.
The increase in the water and the sewers, $4 over 10 years, is that right? $4 over 10 years?
That's right.
Yes.
And our utility bill's gone up $10, BB, in 10 years? Did we go from 70 to 80? And that, the majority of it was in solid waste.
13 in solid waste, and as you can see, 3 in water and 1 in sewer.
Yeah. So that's another issue that we've had with dealing with increased rates. Our solid waste rates had to go up so much, we haven't been able to increase the water and the sewer rates.
Right. Yeah, and when you look at, and one of the things we noted was, if you look at the sewer system by itself, all of those strong things that I mentioned earlier, they're not there. The sewer system revenues are not funding the expenses to the extent they need to. And so it's being made up for, in particular, when we combine them by the water side, which is not, not an uncommon thing. I mean, sewer is more expensive generally than water.
And you all know, last year we did combine the utilities and, you know, we'll continue to see some increased wastewater expenses because of the consent order and some of the mandated efforts we'll have to put in place. One last thing I guess I wanted to touch on, since we did highlight sort of the debt profile and the portion of the school's debt that consumes our debt capacity at this time. I do think, Mr. Mayor, you had a question previously about the state lottery funds or how we sort of pay the debt on the schools.
Yeah,
I just wanted to,
the state lottery funds weren't used the way they were intended. So they took money from the lottery and put into the general fund instead of giving us lottery money at the local level. So it made the state's general fund look a lot better, but it didn't help us with the debt. And I don't know if you were around back when, were you around when we built the schools?
Yes, sir.
You know, part of the plan there was to take those lottery funds and to pay for schools.
That's right.
And that's not happened.
That's right.
And now we have that debt that we're responsible for. And with the school consolidation, we're still going to be responsible for that debt. And just,
I remember you getting from the school superintendent at the time and the school board a commitment to apply those funds to offset that component of the debt service.
and they never got the money.
Right, right.
I will say, as a proactive effort, the county administrator, myself, and our city attorney are working on a proposed draft funding formula agreement for the consolidated system, which once it's drafted, we'll be sure to float to governing bodies and then to, I guess, committees first, but that is underway based on some of the things that were agreed upon or put in place by the state. I don't know, Mark, do you want to expand on that real quick?
Well, at this point, it's relatively early in the process. I have not necessarily delved deeply into it. But I will say this. In trying to figure out what this type of an agreement is going to look like, it's become abundantly clear to me that this is going to be a very unique agreement. Because of the position you all have placed yourself in terms of consolidating both systems with the both localities. Other systems have done consolidation efforts, but not to the magnitude of what we're talking about here. They did, consolidation of maybe maintenance services or what have you. That's one thing, but we're talking about completely joining both divisions, and so we're going into uncharted territory, and I just want to make sure we get it right the first time.
Yes.
So it may take a little while, and it may take a few pages, but we'll get something to you as soon as we can.
And I think, and BB, you correct me if I'm wrong, but because the school didn't get the lottery money, we actually increased their budget and gave them the money to pay us back to pay for the debt.
Technically, yes, it's part of their appropriation, yes.
Which that money should have come from lottery funds, and it didn't. So we had to provide the money to have the debt. That
Yes.
all comes out the same bag.
Back then, there were 3 tiers of payments to the school system. Now there are only 2.
One of the things that the agreement will be featuring is a requirement for the school superintendent and school board members to meet with the heads of the governing bodies and the executives in January to discuss what are the available funds and then give them that information to build the budget around. Because at times there's a hit or miss with that in our current processes. So that will be one thing that is required in the agreement. So if
Any
nothing,
other comments or questions?
sorry to open that can of worms.
Oh,
It's all right.
it's there.
Yes, it is.
Thanks, sir.
Absolutely. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Safe travels back.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryant. Quarterly finance report, third quarter.
Good evening, honorable members of council, Ms. Onitis, everyone in attendance here this evening. We're going to take a quick look at our FY 2021 quarter 3 finance budget summary. This budget and report considerations, this deals with expenditures and revenues through March the 31st. Please be aware that March 31st, not all numbers, especially on the revenue side, are reflected here because those items that are generated in March, we won't see payment for them until April and in some cases May. General fund revenues overall are on a good pace. Enterprise funds, they're being impacted and running below projections. Expenditures in both areas are on target, yet very tight in some areas. The general fund is the city's largest fund, approximately $17.5 to $18 million. This fiscal year, we budgeted very conservatively, reflecting economic impacts from COVID-19 that were projected. These projections were based on professional guidance as well as local input. And currently revenues in the general fund are meeting expectations. Also, strong administration of departmental costs year-to-date have taken place, as well as there are now, since our last report, spending controls in place at certain levels for certain items. However, projections for the remainder of the fiscal year are still favorable. If we take a look at the general fund revenues, basically your general property taxes and other local taxes, those are shown here with the exception of items that will come because of timing and were required to be paid later in the year. And again, that March, April, May scenario. Your general property taxes are your real estate, your personal property, and machinery and tools, whereas your other local tax, sales, use, meals, those are on your second line there. Those are your largest items. If you notice, end of the year, I'm projecting $18,106,222. And looking at general fund expenditures, the two largest areas, public works, public safety, those at 3/4 through the year, that 75% number are well below that. It will, however, be necessary to maintain responsible spending throughout the remainder of the fiscal year. General government, health and welfare will run very close by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, and the projected expenditures are in the $17.9 million range. Utilities, these are your water and sewer revenues. Numbers are down in sales at the current time. However, there's still that opportunity to make up ground with third quarter and fourth quarter. Those are your largest billings. Those quarterly billings, for example, this April bill that came out, we will see larger revenues during April, and that will roll over into May as well. And then if you will remember, at end of the year, when we do that July billing, that'll take care of all of the commercial billing for April, May, and June as well. So we've still got those two large revenue cycles that span about a month and a half each to come related to those. The moratorium on shutoffs does remain in place related to those.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Given the moratorium and the lag in the revenues, could you please share with all of us roughly the number of delinquent accounts we have?
Approximately 250 accounts
Out of,
out of 2,700, so around 10%. Of that 10%, we're looking at roughly $107,000 to $108,000 right there. The utilities, water and sewer expenditures, both plant operations, water and sewer, have project monies in the budget. However, those may not be used unless there's an emergency scenario. And all non-essential purchases do require approvals and efforts to offset potential revenue shortfalls and reduce these year-end projections. Current expenditure budgets, as you can see there, there's revenues, there's your expenditures, my bad, sorry. Your two plants are your largest items there, at the top in the yellow and the fourth one in the yellow. Year to date, you can see as percentage of budget, they're at 56.55 and 55.07, working against that basically 3/4 of a year, 75%. So cost controls, that is being managed very closely and only doing what is required at the present time related to those. Solid waste revenues, again, there, it's the same billing you were talking about. All three are on the same bill. So you don't see the full 9 months or the quarterly. There were COVID-19 impacts based on hauled volumes to the landfill related to projects. However, with warmer weather, and we started to see some of that, an uptick with the increased haul volumes. And we're talking about those volumes that are going across the scales at the landfill that's being hauled in that aren't city refuse trucks. So we're starting to see that. And again, larger payments anticipated in our April and July billings related to our commercial cycles as well. Solid waste expenditures, they're currently within the budget. Need to monitor very closely. And again, that monitoring closely is to try and offset what would be any shortages of revenues related to that. And again, weather can impact costs at our landfill as well. Road repairs, leachate hauling, those types of things. Again, if you look at refuse collection, it's 63.88, refuse disposal at 56.80. Potential options, relief funds that we'd received of $21,000 will be applied in April. We'll start that process next week. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 may provide offsets, infrastructure assistance, and we hope to have formal information related to that soon. There's nothing concrete that we receive presently, and that's expanding on what Mr. Sanderson had addressed earlier. We'll begin working on a repayment program that will initiate this month as well. And then in the solid waste program review, and I know it's been discussed, the recycling plan, we have a new plan going forward, and the numbers related to that are very promising as we finish out this fiscal year and related to next year's budget as well. So we're very pleased with where that looks like that'll be going. And I don't have quite as many slides, so if you have any questions, I'll gladly answer.
The American Relief Fund, have we ever determined how much?
No, you
There's
can't
no-
determine if you don't have the solid information. We don't have it yet.
There's no firm figure. There's still the two sets of figures that have been provided, whether it was, getting roughly 1.6 or upwards of up to $5 million. We don't have any firm figure, nor does any locality really at this point. I actually talked to Mr. Popovich about that today.
Yeah, and I also spoke with Mr. Sanderson just before the meeting, and, the issue really comes down to the thought process at the time, because Virginia is unique, was that because cities provide services both to the city residents as well as county residents, we would be dipping into both the metropolitan pot of money as well as the county pot of money to come up with that $5 million. But now there is a question as to whether that's actually going to be the way it proceeds under the Treasury's interpretation. So quite frankly, our best guess is you're probably not going to be dipping into both pots. But again, nobody knows for sure. But let's just hang our hat on the fact that you're at least getting $1 million, if nothing else. If we're lucky enough to have some kind of legislative change to match the quote-unquote intent that people thought they had going into this, then that's just gravy. But I think that at this point, and Mr. Sanderson can correct me if I'm wrong, I think just focus on the 1 rather than the 5 at this point, because we don't know what Treasury's finally going to issue as their interpretation.
It's $3.5 million worth of gravy, everybody.
I agree with you. It's a lot of good gravy too, but we have to deal with the potential that it's not going to be there.
Anybody got any other questions for?
I wish we could answer it tonight, because it would help us planning, but we just can't.
But Virginia's the only state that really falls into that, aren't they? Independent cities?
I believe so, yes, because we're Commonwealth. It's
Yeah.
part of the issue as well.
So with the other Commonwealth states, like Pennsylvania?
No, I think that they have set themselves up differently under their constitutions, so and the way that their laws have been adopted. So we're just unique.
But because of that uniqueness, we talked about it a little bit ago. We have a school system that in not normal, but other states, the
Right.
county takes care of the school system. Whereas in Virginia, we take care of the school system. So
Exactly.
the best,
Some of those states that school system's not taken care of by the government, it's taken care of by the local school boards, which have the ability to tax and levy taxes.
but we're talking about the relief fund that we would get
Right.
money from that doesn't have anything to do with levying taxes. This is federal.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's why the cities don't take care of it. It's a local school board that does that. It's separate from the
It's the way they're
government.
set up.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the way they're set up.
right.
So wouldn't we be better off to be treated as a county than as a city?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that.
We got a school system. That's what
True.
they're based it on.
True.
You know, the difference
But again,
between
it all
city and
comes,
county.
it all comes down to how Treasury interprets what was adopted. Again, this is one of those situations where, legislation is run through, and then all of a sudden you've got unintended consequences and confusion later on.
Yeah.
And we've got to get it cleared up, but it's going to take time.
Get that cleared up for us, baby, if you don't mind.
We'll see if we can have it done by lunchtime tomorrow.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
That brings us to a presentation from the treasurer, Ms. Harrison, if you could, please.
Maybe I should let you give these out.
Sure.
I think that. Give y'all copies.
Oh, thank you.
I'm left-handed.
Good catch.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'm going to start with the most current month of that for the 3 months, starting with March. The BB&T Celebrity account is, as of the last day of March, is $5,561,478.83. The BB&T lease escrow is at $6,479.17, and our Premier Savings account is $4,380,594.97. The Premier sewer debt is $296,017.74. Our Highland CD stays the same at $82,682.57. And Bank of America, it's $393,244.80. U.S. Bank Water System is $382,073.63. And our U.S. Bank Water Refunding Bond was closed last year, of course. And I was just kind of going to point out the difference from our last report, how much increase there is from the regular tax time. Like if you'll notice, well, you don't have last month's, but in December of last month, our regular account, city's main operating account, was at $4,702,454.72. And then once you jump into January, it jumps to $7,279,657.87. So it's obvious how much the tax dollars increase that one revenue account.
And what did you say it was at the end of December?
At the end of December,
By the end of January, it was 7.2, 7.3 million, but you gave a number for the end of December too, I think.
the end of December, where it was $4,702,454.72.
Yeah, that's the number I was asking for. Thank you. Anybody any questions? Thank you, Tracy. Let's see where we're at.
Mr. Popovich.
Mr. Popovich.
Yes, sir.
It's David's favorite topic.
I know this is what Mr. Crozier's been waiting for all meeting.
Hallelujah.
Quite frankly, I never imagined in a million years that my legal career would result in a moment like this where I start talking about legalized marijuana. But having said that, we are where we are.
Nice picture.
Thanks. Here are some of the basics of what the legislation that has been signed by the governor incorporates. It eliminates certain criminal penalties for small possession, simple possession of 1 ounce of marijuana. It imposes limits on providing criminal history related to any convictions that were had under previous law related to marijuana. It creates a whole bunch of bureaucratic organizations that are going to have certain roles in this entire process, whether it's analyzing health consequences versus finances. But the big one's going to be the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority, which is going to be the one that's in charge essentially of determining where or whether or not someone is going to be licensed to be a distributor of marijuana. And like I said, that's the second section there. There are interesting provisions that talk about social equity. I'm not clear exactly on how this is all going to play out, but again, that's all part of the Cannabis Equity Business Loan Program and those types of things. They're going to have to come up with whatever regulations they're going to come up with, which are not in existence as of today, so I can't really go into a whole lot of depth about those. Having said that, when I drafted this, the governor had yet to sign the legislation. Everything that I had previously said was essentially going to be delayed until January 1, 2024. What the governor sent back to the General Assembly with suggested revisions, which has now since been adopted, now specifically allows you to have the possession of small amounts of marijuana effective without being in violation of the law, effective July 1 of this year. So, having said that, Yes, ma'am. It's easier just to say it. However, having said that, the other things remain the same in terms of becoming effective as of 2024. Now, what the legislation does is limits the number of businesses, dispensaries, I guess is the way they want to call them, wholesalers, manufacturers, and actual farm cultivation of marijuana to these numbers. And once those numbers run out, no one else can have a permit to do it, okay? So the question then became, how are localities going to deal with this? So within the legislation, there is provision that allows you as a governing body to petition the circuit court for a referendum on the question of whether to allow retail marijuana in your local jurisdiction, i.e., if one of these people asks for a permit in Covington, are we going to say, yeah, let them have the license, or are we going to say, no, we are effectively a, let's use the alcohol, dry community? So the question on the ballot would be, shall the operation of retail marijuana stores be prohibited in the city of Covington? If the majority says no, then those types of stores may be permitted. If they say yes, we're effectively a dry county effective that coming January 1st. Now, having said that, the resolution or the request for a referendum is not mandatory. It's discretionary. So if you determine that there's no need to petition the court to determine whether or not you are going to be a dry county, you are automatically saying that you're willing to allow those types of establishments within your locality. So you got to keep that in mind, okay? So if you feel that the citizens of the city of Covington really do not want such establishments in the city, then you have to have the referendum in order to prohibit those types of businesses locating here. Now, having said that, if you don't have the referendum, or if the referendum turns out to actually suggest that the citizens really don't care, yeah, they can have a business here, that's fine, then we need to start considering some issues out there, okay? Zoning. If you're going to allow these types of businesses, where are you going to allow them? They're going to be in solely industrial areas, residential areas. What I mean, we're going to have to decide and make changes to the zoning ordinance to adapt to these different types of businesses. You're allowed to have a marijuana tax as well, a potential source of revenue. Again, that doesn't necessarily say, oh yeah, definitely allow it, but you have to consider the fact that if you're looking for a source of revenue, here's one. Your business license tax also applies. How is that going to deal with, these kinds of dispensaries? And also, how involved do you want us as your staff to get involved in the process of developing the regulations that are going to come over the next 2-3 years relative to the sale of marijuana? If you involve yourself more into the comment process of the regulations, you can try and steer where those regulations go. It's not a promise that you'll make any headway if they really don't want to listen to you, but as long as if you have an interest in us being more engaged in paying attention to what those regulations are, we certainly need y'all's direction on how to do that. Main point out all of this is come January 1, a small amount of marijuana can be carried legally. By 2024, if you do not hold a referendum to make this a dry community, marijuana is going to be sold within the city limits of Covington. So it's up to you to decide. You have up until November of 2023 to decide on the referendum question. Obviously, if you want to start thinking about where you want to locate such facilities and that type of thing, the sooner you get to the answer to your question of whether or not we will allow or not allow marijuana to be sold here in the city of Covington, the sooner you get to that conclusion, or you can start focusing on the other issues. But I throw that out there for your consideration. Okay?
Thank you.
Questions?
All right, thank you, sir.
I got some questions.
Okay.
So if we go to the referendum and the citizens of Covington decide they do not want marijuana facilities in the city, you're saying it's a dry city,
Right.
but in actuality, possession is still legal up
Correct.
to an ounce.
That is correct. It's just simply that it cannot be sold at a dispensary within the city limits. They could go into Allegheny County, let's say, if Allegheny doesn't care, and buy it across the city line and bring it back. Allegheny gets the tax revenue, you get nothing.
How do they work, and you might not know this? You talked about, what was the phrasing you used, the criminal history.
Right.
People that were busted for it for, say, 1 ounce and under in the past, you may not know the answer to this. What do they do with that? Does that come off of their history, or?
I didn't delve too deeply into the criminal side of things. I left that to
I was just curious.
Commonwealth
people who had
attorneys to
gotten-
figure
It's
out.
kind of like people who got busted for prohibition violations.
Right.
Was that still on their record when prohibition was repealed?
Exactly, and remember, there's still a lot of unknowns out there. You have localities and businesses that have policy manuals that prohibit, the use of marijuana on the job. Well, if that ounce is now legal, can you really tell them, no, you can't? I mean, obviously, I don't want you to be on the job if you're somehow not functional because of what you're doing.
Kind of like drinking on the job.
Right, exactly. But I mean, there's a lot of these questions that are out there that we've all got to figure out how it's
I
all
guess
gonna-
that would be my biggest one. How do you tell, and you just use a CDL driver for the city, a random CDL driver. He gets off work on a Friday, he's got all weekend off, he fires up a blunt on Friday evening, it's still in his, he walks into work and they say, random drug test. So he did it legally, or
Right.
she did it legally, but yet
It's interesting that you brought that up because I was actually having a conversation about that very topic with the chief prior to the meeting, and he was telling me that there are certain levels that can be detected based on, blood sampling and that type of thing to determine if they are somehow inebriated by it. So again, this is all going to be a new thing. And the whole idea originally of pushing this out until 2024 was to try and answer some of these questions, right? Let's get our system set up so that we understand what we're getting into. But now, I don't know what's going to happen. Just because now we're going to have to try and get our system set up a heck of a lot faster to try and address all these different unknowns.
Also on a dry, you say this could be a dry community. Is that going to affect the growing of it in the community? Because as it is now, you're going to be allowed 1 male plant, 3 female plants.
No, it does not affect that.
Okay, so it can still grow it right in Covington.
It's
Here we go
The
again
retail
now.
of it.
you just cannot become a retail sailor of it.
Right.
But, so, again, this is one of those situations where it's a very strange dichotomy. One side you're saying, no, you can't do this, other side say it's perfectly legal. It's gonna be interesting to see how we all get this worked out.
should in your packet, yeah.
And one thing, I guess, to touch on the Vice Mayor's question, in conversations I had with the Commonwealth's attorney last week, when we were discussing inmate housing, it is actually up to each jurisdiction, judicial jurisdiction, as to how they will handle expunging and addressing the criminal records that fall within the parameters that the state has provided.
With 400 dispensaries statewide, what's the chance of a dispensary being in Covington?
No idea.
Slim to none.
Because, but again, I take you back to the point that I made about the social equity side of things. I mean, it may be a scenario where somebody here puts in a permit request, and because of these social equity provisions and their low income, or whatever it might be that they come up with, they may be looked on favorably over somebody in Fairfax County, right? So, who knows? I don't know the answers at this moment in time.
So we could, put on referendum, let the people decide what they want or they don't want, right?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was at the Amherst Board of Supervisors work session the other day, and this very issue was discussed. And the majority of the Board of Supervisors there felt it was important to get the citizens to make the decision.
I agree.
And not to
Well,
make that decision on their own.
My only thing with that is, I can just hear the uproar. If we have a weed referendum and we didn't hold a school referendum,
Correct.
how much hell we're gonna get.
State code, though,
I know,
dictates
and
what to
it's
do.
apples and oranges, but I can just hear it now. Okay, y'all are gonna have a referendum to regulate weed, but you wouldn't with our kids' future. I can just hear it now. And that's the other thing to think about.
But state code dictated.
Oh,
what
I
you
know,
got
and I know that,
referendum.
but it's
That's
all
what's
about
happening
optics.
here.
I know what I understand that part of it, but I can just hear the public sentiment. They're not gonna care about what the state code says and all that. They're just gonna see the fact we're holding a weed referendum and we did a school referendum.
But that's a state issue.
But that's a state issue, but it's gonna come down on us.
We're doing what the state requires us to do.
Yeah, I got you.
Both cases.
Both cases, yeah, but like I say, I can just hear it coming down now.
So you don't have to have a referendum, and as we mentioned, since there's such a stringent limit within the state on wholesalers, dispensaries, all of those things, there may be a 1% or a 50%, chance we get something here, but either way, there's still legally going to be John Q. Public that can have, 4 plants and, have their ounce on them at any given point in time.
Legally,
Also, I think it's important to look at the potential just from a revenue, as we just went over, the need for revenue, and just not wanting to potentially shoot yourself in the foot. You just don't know if you land something, and you may or may not. It just depends on the permitting process. My understanding, though, is as well, is that the permitting process is very expensive and very time-consuming.
And looking at these numbers here of how many dispensaries, how many wholesalers, how many manufacturers, and how many cultivation facilities, meaning farms. Whoever has the most money will end up with these numbers. I guarantee, it's wide open for all kinds of.
but Mark, in the back of your mind, in the back of your legal mind, do you think it's going to get to that point without some kind of huge locality, class action uproar between now and then? Or do you think this is still going to plow through?
This is the law of the Commonwealth of Virginia as it stands today. And, I don't see any backtracking happening out of it. It was the governor's push. He specifically wanted this. And so, we are where we are. Unless, control of House, Senate, and governor seat changes hands and everything gets tossed out the window, I don't see it ever changing. I mean, this has been an issue that's been debated for years. And, as soon as your states of California and Oregon and Washington and Colorado started down this path, it was inevitable that other states are going to start following suit because they would see the revenue dollars that they could potentially get. It's just, that's the nature of the system.
Mark, would you, and this is a question that I have, so should a locality potentially hold referendum, and this is just theoretical, to be a dry locality, would you foresee, or should we, is there a potential to foresee then, when the state starts reaping, the revenue benefits, because there'll also be a state tax on this, that those dry localities may be
Getting up.
exempt from any revenue generated statewide from it?
I don't think.
I know that's a silly question, but it's just, it seems like this is all evolving in such a weird
It is,
way.
it's very strange. I just don't, I don't think from an equity standpoint that revenue generated at the state level that is somehow going to be distributed to the local level can be cherry-picked just because a locality says, I don't want a dispensary within my boundaries. I mean, I think it's equal taxation kind of concept. And so if other localities are getting some kind of benefit out of the revenue generated, all localities need to benefit from that.
Is there any discussion on there being social equity in how they disperse the revenue that the state generates from this? I guess, there's certain communities and certain segmented areas of the state where, they're highly densely populated and urban and high poverty rate.
Exactly.
That, would get more portions of the revenue. Has there been any?
We haven't even gotten to that point yet, but I can see that a scenario where the social equity provisions of the legislation would focus any benefits out of it to those localities or areas
Like 7 cities, metro
that are more impacted than others. So we shall see. It's going to be an evolving story, but again, the only thing I want you all to think about and draw from this presentation is whether or not you think having a referendum is worth going through the process. It may be a situation where the citizens themselves begin to petition you to specifically ask for a referendum. We'll see what happens going forward, but just wanted to put that out there for you. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you.
I could share a brief update on some landfill tonnage if you'd like, to get a consensus, since we
please do.
initially did that. That might not be a bad idea, even though I don't have that much. Well, good evening, members of Covington City Council. I will try to be as brief as possible, considering you all have sat through a litany of presentations, many with numbers that usually tend to make people's eyes bleed. Mine are almost at that point with budget development myself. Wanted to update you all this morning. Mr. Popovich, Mr. Bryant, our head of city operations, Mr. Dressler, and some others participated in a call with DEQ's inspection division, specifically regarding some of our maintenance efforts at the landfill, as well as our tonnage permit modification efforts. The folks in at the DEQ inspection division expressed concern over the limit of 75 tons. And I will say that their concern is that, with our current 51 daily tonnage limit, we oftentimes have days where we're a little over. When we have put in for temporary waivers, when we knew we were having large-scale projects between our industrial entities that are within our limits, as well as our other partners that work with us at the landfill, Bath County having major commercial or other construction development, getting a 100-ton waiver, we've also had instances where we've met or just went over that. Their recommendation was to err on the side of caution and alleviate, some of the back and forth with the constant reporting then that is required if you go over even just by a ton of, timely notification of actually asking for the modification to be 100 tons. Now, that wouldn't mean every day that we're doing 100 tons or anything. That just gives us a sweet spot and some wiggle room and prevents us from going back to them for temporary waivers or other things. As you all know, this has been a very extensive process with them and what they've reviewed. We just now got our temporary waiver March 30th, a temporary waiver for 75 tons, while they're still considering our permanent modification for the 75 tons. So a temporary waiver is only good for 180 days. So, it might be best to plan with leeway, knowing that, if you every day collected 100 tons, yes, you would fill up yourself faster. But the instances where we have actually had 100 tons have been few and far between. But it also gives staff some additional bandwidth with just how they have to monitor those scales every day and how we're able to accommodate folks like West Rock, Ingevity, and Bath with their needs, as well as community cleanup, which, as I'm sure you all and the public saw today, we have pushed out till we had good clarity on where we were with our tonnages and what DEQ was recommending for our operations. So at this time, I would like to ask for a consensus from you all on submitting to DEQ on city letterhead, just that we would go ahead and up it to the 100 tons.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it, unless, does anyone have any questions, concerns to share with me? Gave a pretty long update last week, so. All right, then.
That's your whole report?
Yes.
Cool.
I was being considerate of all the other presentations.
Thank you.
I can be nice,
So we have a resolution, 2114, authorizing Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission to amend its charter to reduce membership requirements.
Move for approval.
Second.
Almost said agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We have an appropriation resolution 2115 to accept funds from the Virginia Department of Transportation for Route 220 paving in the amount of $429,000.
Move for approval.
Second.
Scott, can we have a roll call on that, please?
Sir? Mr. Carson?
Yes.
Mr. Tucker?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Crozier?
4.
Mayor Sabo?
4. Appropriation resolution 2116 to accept funds from Virginia Department of Emergency Management for the 2012 derecho storm.
Good God.
They on the ball, ain't they?
Where's this been?
8 years.
Here.
9 years. I guess.
Almost 9, yeah.
That's
Move for
diapers.
approval.
Second.
Could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Carson?
4.
Mr. Tucker?
4.
Vice Mayor Crozier?
4.
Mayor Sabo?
4.
We came in with the derecho.
Yes, we did.
We were fork at court,
We didn't have any power at first meeting I was ever there.
didn't we, Tommy?
Huh?
We were in fork at court.
Yes, we were.
We got blown away.
Resolution 2117 for the landfill site project, $7,939.25.
Move for approval.
Second.
Ms. Scott, can we have a roll call on that one, please?
Mr. Carson?
4.
Mr. Tucker?
4.
Vice Mayor Crozier?
4.
Mayor Sabo?
4. We want to add 2 things.
Yes, sir.
One of them was resolution.
R
2118,
2118.
And
And that is a resolution of the Council of the City of Covington and thanks to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Move for approval.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
And was something else we needed?
Yes, this is a proclamation that, if approved, would be signed by the mayor, is in recognition of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, which is April 18th through the 24th, 2021, and I'll make a motion for approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We need to have a discussion to extend the date upon which personal property and real property taxes are paid in the city of Covington. This is part of what we have done in the past when we were having COVID issues and people weren't able to get in the building, and we extended the tax payment dates that
Building's
threw
open.
off the Commissioner of Revenue's process of getting her books finished in time, which then in turn created problems for the treasurer's office in getting money in time to meet the deadlines. So what we're asking to do is to extend the personal property and real estate tax dates, due dates. Did we pick a date? Is there a date we're extending it to?
I don't see a date.
No, I remember talking about it, but I don't remember the date.
We considered moving it to the end of June, June 30th. That way we could keep it still in the fiscal year or,
Isn't that what we did with December?
yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
So that gives time to get stuff in, but keeps us in the right year.
Yeah.
So if we had a motion to extend it to the 30th of June, would we be,
Yes, sir.
I'll make a motion, we extend the personal property and real property tax deadlines from June the 5th to June the 30th.
I'll second it.
is there any more discussion or questions? Let's have a roll call on that one, please.
Mr. Carson,
4.
Mr. Tucker,
Or,
Vice Mayor Crozier,
Or,
Mayor Summerall.
4. We had on the agenda tonight to discuss donating the utility trailer that that's used by the Shriners.
I'd like to make a motion due to some issues with the trailer and working those out that we table this until we get those resolved.
Okay,
okay,
okay with that?
I agree.
Do we have any new business?
I've got one very quick thing. I was approached by a resident over on Walnut Street within the last few years, and this is something for planning down the line, doesn't have to be acted on tomorrow. In the past several years, we've done sidewalk improvements down, I think, Cherry, down Oak, down some of the other side streets in that area. The person on Walnut Street that caught me said that nothing was ever done as far as improving sidewalks on Walnut Street. Can we look at that, maybe find something down the line where we can, not tomorrow, but as we're planning ahead to see if we can work something to where we can actually get that street included into some,
Yes,
see what the need is and then see what it's gonna take.
We're trying to work on developing a way to prioritize our sidewalk renewal and maintenance. Our priority sidewalk project right now, though, as I'm sure all of you could agree on, is working to address Thacker Avenue. As you know, VDOT has told us very plainly that that is not a project that scores competitively with them, and it would be in our best interest if, we went ahead and addressed that. So we'll be working on doing that early summer with in-house resources. But yes, long and short of it is yes, just like we came up with a paving list or a list of
I think
blighted properties.
This
for-
one residence kind of felt that the residents of Walnut got shortchanged because the other streets around them had some attention and they didn't. So I wanted to bring that ahead and see if we can maybe see what needs to be done and what we can do going forward. And that's all I had.
Okay, thank you.
Tommy, I got something to.
Go ahead.
I'm getting calls on Hillcrest again. Are they gonna pave it or not pave it? Their road hadn't had anything done to it in 50 years. It's a hazard. It's washed away in places up around Carol's house, and she's calling me on a regular basis and said, I thought you said that in the spring or when it starts to get warm, you were gonna pave my road. And I said, we're working on it, Carol, but that's where I'm at. I just don't know what to tell them.
It is on the list for paving, however, due to, as you all are aware, the supplemental environmental project that we are doing for our consent order to avoid having to pay the civil penalty in full to DEQ that would have been, I think it would have been $60,000. We identified doing the stream restoration project in that area.
Right.
We have to get that construction done first because then it would impact and damage the pavement in that area if we had new pavement down.
That was my next question.
So we will be getting that done. We just finished the design for that project and submitted it to DEQ for review and comment. And we also requested a revised timeline on that project to DEQ because we were delayed with what was a wet winter and with COVID and just working to plan those things out. So the design's been complete. We're waiting on the comments and feedback from DEQ. It's been a long day. And once we have that, we're going to be working to get bid packages together to then move forward with the construction or, the manual work of the restoration of the stream. And the reason we can't pave yet is because we'll be having heavy equipment in there.
Also, there where Carol lives and in that turn, that's good though that you're doing it the way you're doing it, because I think when you get into redoing that creek or working on that creek, the point that they're saying where the road's being undermined is probably gonna need a culvert. I mean, it's coming. It's cracking up and
So-
each time we get a big rain, the whole deal gets a little bit worse.
So I will say between the planning and design for the environmental project, the rock wall work that was done recently, and what we priced out for paving of just that area there, when it's all said and done, there will be just so far with that, that's about $110,000.
What's the rock wall thing? We gonna put some in or?
There was a rock wall that had been caving in that we worked to remove and
You removed it and put
grass.
dirt, yeah.
And Mr. Dressler worked on that. We don't have firm prices yet for what the actual restoration physical work will cost, but there has been a considerable investment in the last 12 months in that pocket of the community, just working on addressing the issues that stream and the way the water runs has created.
Okay,
So it's not a perfect answer, but we are making a considerable investment in trying to address it and fix it the right way.
but they can look, something's gonna happen.
Yes.
I can just keep telling them, just wait, we're working on it.
Yes.
Okay.
Stream work's gotta be done first.
Got them, I'm gonna tell them. Do they
Uh,
think?
Alan, did you have anything? I want to mention that we have 2 school board appointments coming up this year. Erica Hunter's term is up and Tanya Jones's.
Yeah.
So next month, we will need to have
Nominations.
we gotta have nominations at the
public
work
hearing.
session.
Public hearing at the work session.
Get the
Public hearing to have nomination.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the interviews will be,
Work session
you're doing the nominations at the work session
in June.
in June.
Yeah, they don't take your seat till July 1st.
Wait a minute, you're confused me.
Don't
Start
we get
again.
nominations, don't we get the nominations in May? We do the interviews in June and then they take their seat in July. Isn't that the way we've done it?
I think that's how it was done last time, but the last time, because of COVID,
We
we
had to
did
do it all
phone
in one
interviews.
night, wasn't it?
Yeah, and phone interviews, I believe, is what
Yeah.
Gail's records indicate.
So that's something we need to keep on our radar.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I don't know if I'm finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. I rescind my motion.
All in favor?
Aye. I wasn't even thinking.